Hey Viking fans, welcome to another edition of Viking Spin. I'm your host Jason, and in this episode we're going to break down the Vikings' second preseason game that they played last night against the Seahawks. We'll talk about the good, the not so good, and the in-between. I thought personally, and this was what was most important to me, was the first team offense's performance. And I thought that was definitely part of the good. I would say, I'm just going to list as far as who stood out for me. I thought Sam Bradford looked really good. He was in sync with Stephon Diggs, especially on that first drive. Dalvin Cook ran the ball very well, and what made both of those things possible was the first team offensive line. And despite the fact that they were down two starters, there was no Riley Reif and there was no Alex Boone, but Rashad Hill and Nick Easton filled in there and did a really nice job. And it was nice also to see Pat Elflein get the start at center and turn in another really good performance as he did in the last game against the Bills as well. So personally, I think Elflein has probably cemented that starting center position because he's moving his man off the ball really well, and he's had no issues in pass protection. So very pleased with that. Mike Remmers played a clean game as well. Fans were concerned with him giving up that sack last week, but he cleaned it up very nicely. Opened holes in a running game. Had zero sacks allowed by the Vikings offensive line, so definitely a very encouraging performance by them. Some penalties when they got down in the red zone on that first drive, but definitely something to build on. So I also thought that the kickers looked really good, both kickers and punters. You had Kai Forbath go in there and drill a 51-yard field goal. And also Marshall Kane hit he hit a 29-yarder. And both Ryan Quigley and Taylor Semenk punted well. Quigley had two punts inside the 10-yard line, and Semenk had one as well. Had a 54-yarder. So those two guys are playing very well in pinning the opponents deep in their own territory. I thought the Vikings' kick coverages looked good, both on kickoffs and punts. Defensively, Danielle Hunter looks really good. Him and Everson Griffin are just an absolutely fantastic duo there at the defensive end spots for the Vikings this year. It's going to be very fun to watch again. Also, I thought Eric Wilson looked good. A reserve linebacker. He is trying to play his way onto the roster, and I thought he turned in another good performance. He played well last week against the Bills, and he turned out another good game in this one where he had a fumble recovery and some tackles. I thought Anton Exum looked decent. He started at safety in place of Andrew Zendejo, who was out with an injury, and also Jaleel Johnson, and I thought also Tayshawn Bauer. Both of them looked good. Bauer has been really active as a pass rusher, and Johnson as well. Johnson had some tackles for loss, looking good. I think Jaleel Johnson actually has a chance to challenge. I would like to see him play some more three technique. He's played some three and he's played nose, throughout this camp and preseason. But to me, he's looked better than Tom Johnson this camp. So we'll see how that plays out. Bucky Hodges, I was waiting for him to break out, and he had some splash plays there at the end. Caught a touchdown pass there towards the end of the ball game. And definitely he has showed the ability to get open and in good solid hands there. I think he can be a nice weapon for the Vikings this year. let's see. Now, I would say the in-between was probably, because we talked the good, the bad, and the in-between. The in-between, I would say, would be Taylor Heineke. His performance was sort of up and down. He had some throws that he missed, but he also showed an ability. He had a tough play where ball bounced off of Isaac Frichte and went for an interception, but he was mentally tough. He came back, was able to lead the Vikings down for a touchdown drive. I thought he moved well and got back on track as his time went on. Case Keenum had a really nice game in Buffalo. I thought he did all right last night. A couple of poor decisions, but nothing that was absolutely tragic. But Keenum. The thing I like about Keenum is he shows toughness. And his ability to to sense pressures and get himself out of trouble and find an open man downfield. So, I think Case Keenum has looked like a solid backup so far. Marcus Sherrills was up and down. He gave up a touchdown on defense, but then came back with some decent plays later on. He's playing as a reserve corner. I would like to see Sherrills return some kicks and punts. Obviously, they're trying to get his backups, situated there, but that's one of the things we'll get to in a second. I thought Eric Kendricks played decently. Dayton Jones, Ben Gideon, and also Michael Floyd. And then the not so good. Well, the not so good was probably the return game. Punt returning and kick returning has not really looked that good. And last night, Jerick McKinnon got tripped up real early in his kick return. Rodney Adams had a fumble. Stacy Coley had an unwise decision to try to take the ball out when it wasn't looking so good. I mean, maybe that's because they're really trying to prove something right now, that they can run the ball back, but you got to be smarter than that when you're returning. But these guys are rookies and they're learning, and I'm sure that they're going to hear about it. Also in the not so good column, Mackenzie Alexander. He had a strong week against Buffalo. Nice game he played, but he got beat pretty badly here in this Seattle game. He looked really bad at times trying to cover Doug Baldwin in the slot, so he's got to get that cleaned up. And then, we've talked about Rodney Adams and Jerick McKinnon having struggles on the return game, and Isaac Frichte, I think, probably just played himself into a cut. He's just not shown consistent hands during this camp and preseason. So, but overall, I thought the Vikings looked good where it was important, which was in the first team offense and the offensive line. We wanted to make sure that they improved, and they certainly looked a heck of a lot better this week. So I was very encouraged, and hopefully they can build upon that going into the third preseason game, which should be more of a dress rehearsal for the regular season than anything that we've seen so far. So some other news that's on the news front here. Mike Zimmer, after the game, said that they should be getting back all of their injured players. So the guys that haven't played so far, Riley Reif and Latavius Murray, should be ready to go for the next game when the Vikings take on the Niners at home in Minnesota at US Bank Stadium. So it'd be nice to get those guys back. Also, Trey Waynes will be coming back. He had suffered that shoulder injury in the Buffalo game, so he should be ready to go. Kentrell Brothers, Laquan Treadwell should also be returning for the Vikings as well. And then, let's see if I left anyone out. Oh yeah, Andrew Sendejo. They should be getting him back too. So we'll get a chance to see the Vikings at full strength, so to speak, in their next game, and I'm really looking forward to that. Probably see the starters play for the longest extended period of time so far this preseason. They went into the second quarter last night, so they played a little bit more than they did in the Buffalo game. And then, of course, because you're not going to have them play in the final preseason game, you're going to be looking at roster bubble guys and making your evaluations on who you want to put on a practice squad and who's going to make the 53 and who's getting cut and so forth. So that's what we've got in store. I think some of these position battles, some of them are going to continue on. I would think that they would probably want to go and decide on the starting center spot going into next week. Like I said, I think Pat Elflein's got it wrapped up with two really solid performances there. Not that Nick Easton has played bad; he's played fine. But Elflein has really given the Vikings offensive line a jolt. He's had no issues in pass protection, and his run blocking is just outstanding. He's really moving the pile, and he was able to open some holes for Dalvin Cook. And can't say enough about Dalvin Cook, Sam Bradford, and Stephon Diggs last night, really showing us some excitement in what this offense can do once they get going. So I think heading into this next game, you're actually going to see the Vikings game plan a little bit. I don't know if all fans are aware, but the teams don't really game plan very much. Not all the teams, at least, game plan too much. The Vikings have not game planned at all for the Bills or the Seahawks. They're really running some basic concepts on offense and defense. Just putting guys in certain situations. It's not something that, it's a little bit of experimenting. It's probably, if you're playing a real regular season game, you might approach things differently. So that's why, you always do have to kind of take preseason with a grain of salt. And so you look at the Vikings have a 1-1 record in preseason. It really doesn't mean anything, because these games don't count, and they're not, the team is actually not trying to game plan it and put as much serious effort into it as they would in the regular season. And that goes for all the teams, really. So, but that's what we've got going on. Like I mentioned, the center position. I think that Case Keenum has probably staked his claim to the backup quarterback spot. They might let that play out a little bit more. I know, but I think Heineke has played well enough to warrant sticking on the 53 as the third-string quarterback. I would say that the defensive tackle is probably going to go on, between Tom Johnson, Jaleel Johnson, and Dayton Jones, trying to get that spot for the starting spot there next to Linval Joseph. I don't think I've seen enough out of Will Sutton to say that he's a serious contender for that right now. That's my personal opinion. Outside linebacker, the Bills game, they started Edmund Robinson, and last night they started Ben Gedeon. In each game, the person who didn't start still saw a lot of time out there. I think both of these guys are probably right there with Emmanuel Lemur in that three-man competition. But Ben Gedeon has looked pretty good, and he's probably the best tackler out of the three. But that's probably one that they're going to let play out a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how they divvy up the reps in this third preseason game for that. Zimmer mentioned that the kicking competitions are going to go all the way through. Want to see these guys in live situations, and I think they've all fared well. It's been a very, very good competition for the kicking and punter spots. All four guys vying for these two spots have played really well, and I think they're bringing out the best in each other. So that's the status of that job there. So some things are left to be determined, and we'll see how those play out. And probably the best thing I can take away from last night's game, other than the fact that the first team offense played markedly better, is that there was no injuries. Seattle chose to keep playing their starters for longer than the Vikings did, and they wound up losing their starting left tackle for the season. So that was really tragic for them, and that's probably something that Zimmer might be thinking about that, in this next preseason game here, just how long he wants to have the starters out for. Usually in the third preseason game, they go at least until, they usually at least play one half, and sometimes they go into the third quarter. I wouldn't be surprised to see Zimmer avoid the third quarter with his starters, just because of how injuries have affected the rest of the league, and him wanting to stay ahead of the curve here. So, but we'll see how that plays out. And that's all we've got for this week. Hope you guys have enjoyed this segment, and we'll see you after the next game. So long.